Hey, it's PhilzGoodMan, and I'm here to answer the question, what's it like playing Krunker with maxed out graphics right now here in 2020, mid-2020 that is. The last time I did a video like this was 7 months ago, so a lot about the game has changed since then. Also, I know that not everyone has a super powerful gaming PC, but the point of the video is to figure out how good Krunker can possibly look with everything turned on. And I do plan on doing more low-spec content in the future. As you can see here, I got everything turned on. And in case you're wondering, I will include a link to my current settings as well as my mod and my interface in the description. But yeah, everything is maxed out except for the frame cap, because I want to record the video at like really high quality. So 15,000 to 25,000 bitrate. And just having a frame cap will ensure that I don't have any dropped frames. The first example is on Newtown, and it is a good map to show off some of the new graphics tech, the new settings. So right there you can see the dynamic shadow, and that's the shadow that's underneath the player, but I believe that other objects and elements on the map can also cast that type of shadow. And then we also got the shadow resolution on high and the soft shadow setting turned on. So I believe that softens up the shadows, kind of adds a blur to the edges to make it more realistic. One thing that you might notice about this map is some visual errors, so like the lines that are going across the concrete, and that's something that I noticed when I turn up the graphics like really high. And also pay attention to the sky. So I have lighting on high, and you can see a nice gradient effect going from blue to white. The good thing is that with all these settings turned on, you can see FPS is between 300 and 400, so that's really good. And because slide control is in the game, it matters a bit less if you have high FPS versus lower FPS. So let's move on to the next map, and I'll show you guys an example on Oasis, which is also one of the newer maps. The first thing that you notice right off the bat is the lighting and the shadows. And I believe that this map was introduced around the same time that the dynamic shadow setting was added to the game, in addition to the different lighting qualities. And it's a great map to showcase that because there's a ton of shadows. In this part, pay attention to the sun, because it's a good example of how the shadows work. And if you look at like some of the boxes and like the side of that building, you can see that it actually works like properly. So the shadow is being cast where it should be. Moving on to Undergrowth, which is not as new as some of the other ones I showed you, but you can definitely see those soft shadows at play here. So the shadows cast by the side of the building, it doesn't have like those harsh edges like it used to. In general, everything looks like shiny and reflective, which is kind of cool. And if you pay attention to the grass on the ground, that's the map detail setting at play there. So it's actually moving like left and right with the wind. So it's cool that the developers went back and added map details. Now, map detail setting, it really is resource intensive, and it does limit your FPS a lot compared to other settings, but also dependent on the map. Moving on to freight, which is kind of cool because you do have these light posts that are around the map. So it's kind of a neat feature. Unfortunately, on freight, I do get some graphical errors. So those horizontal lines that are running across the floor. And that's just a problem I have with some maps with high graphic settings. And by the way, you can see here that I used the 1AD Matrix AK skin a lot in these gameplay clips because I am giving that skin away, so gotta send it off. Now we're on Berg, the classic map, and I just want to take a second to talk about some of the design goals that I believe the Krunker devs are designing towards. So the cool thing about all these graphic settings is the fact that when they add high-end graphic settings, they also add low-end graphic settings to help balance it out. So there is the no texture setting that was most recently added to the game. There's low spec, which disables the legs of the players from rendering. Next up, we got gameplay that was played on Middletown. So the old version of Newtown, essentially. Also a classic Krunker map, and looks more similar compared to some of the newer maps with all the graphic settings turned up really high. But again, you can really see the soft shadows at play there when you don't have these harsh shadows that are next to the bushes. They're much more realistic looking. And again, with the map detail setting turned on, you have that grass that kind of like sways side by side. Here you can see the latest version of Kanji, which looks great with the maxed out settings. Even the loading screen looks awesome. And this map in particular is the one that differs the most when you have the map detail setting turned on versus off. I think that this is probably the best example at showcasing the best that Krunker can possibly look when you have all these new graphic settings turned on. Of course, if it's giving you performance issues, then by all means, like, you can turn that off. But to me, it almost looks like a different game. So now I'll be talking through some of my general thoughts about what it was like playing with Krunker maxed out. Obviously, the game has changed a lot since the last time I did the test, but I was pleasantly surprised, and I can see why some players are starting to have lower frame rate caps, and I use a lower frame rate cap myself for this video. And even though I was recording at really high bit rate, a lot higher than I've done before, didn't have any performance issues, and the specs are Core i7 5960X and GTX 1080. I built the PC like 6 years ago, but I would say that it's still a pretty powerful PC. Games like COD Warzone are much more taxing, and even on my PC, I'm getting frame rates between like 120 and 160 FPS, whereas Krunker, when you max it out, hardly breaks a sweat. So not really sure why more people don't try higher graphic settings, but at the same time, you might be streaming or recording, and it makes sense to go for as many competitive advantages as possible, whether that's lowering the input lag or having higher FPS. Like I mentioned earlier, the fact that the Krunker devs both add high spec and low spec settings to the game, I think says a lot. I also saw both visual improvements as well as performance related improvements to settings like dynamic shadows and lighting that were added to the game earlier, so don't write off a setting right away. Often the Krunker devs add these settings to the game as experimental features. You don't have to turn it on, and they just keep on refining them later and then eventually introduce even more new features. So I'm definitely looking forward to more graphic settings in the future. I did spend a lot of time trying to tune my own settings, so tune my UI, mod, in-game settings, and video settings, so I spent a lot of time on it. But after doing this test with maxed out graphics, I might have to even take another look at it. So that's it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please help my channel out by subscribing. And also you can use code PHILZ in the Krunker item store. See you guys next time.